So I just made this Anytime workflow that you can create any image using AI, and it uses Gemini 2.5 Flash, which is also known as Nano Banana. Let me quickly show you how it works. So let's quickly upload two images. I have a selfie of myself here, and I have a picture of my water bottle here. So let's just quickly upload that, and let's get our webhook URL from Anytime. Paste it here, and let's quickly write a prompt. Let's see. Make the person in the picture hold the water bottle selfie with a mountain background. You can generate. Gonna give it a few seconds to process, and as you can see, it basically did what I asked it to do. Basically took the selfie and the water bottle picture and the description that I basically gave it, and basically also gave me a big smile with the mountain background that I asked it to do. It also gives you an option to download, which you can click on here to download. So that's basically how it works, and let me give you a quick high-level overview of how everything comes together. So what we have today is an Anytime workflow that you can create any image. It has a Lovable, which acts as the front end, and then we have the back end, which is Anytime. The front end is where you upload your image, you put your description, and the way you put your webhook, which Lovable uses to send an API request. And then once the API request is sent, it triggers the Anytime backend and processes everything. And then once that is done, it sends the result as the response of the API call, and then it displays the image here. Basically the front end displays the image, and it also gives you an option to download the result. Let's go over to Anytime and basically explain things further. So it all starts with this webhook here, as I've told you, and we have two modes for this create image. We have a combined image where you basically upload two images, which is basically what I just showed you. An edit image, for instance, will be, let's say you upload this image, for example, and you tell it to change the background to something like Burj Khalifa, then edit image function. So once that JSON payload is sent from the Lovable to Anytime, it basically has a type, whether that's edit type or combine type. And the way that is differentiated is because if two images are sent, that's a combine type, and if one image is sent, that's an edit type. So once that is sent, we move it over to the switch case, which then decides the type. Basically, if the type sent is combine, it moves over to the sum workflow, and then if the type is edit, it moves over to the edit sum workflow. The edit and combine sub workflow are similar, but then they all handle their tasks separately. The combine is done to combine images, edit is done to edit images. So which simply means is that we have three Anytime workflows. We have the main workflow, which is this one that you're seeing right here, and then we have the edit image sub workflow, and we have the combine image sub workflow. I'll quickly be going to give you a quick high level overview of how each sub workflow works. So once the workflow basically has worked on the image and produced the output is basically sent back, as I've said, using as a response for the API call sent from the Lovable, basically. So if you click on here, let's go deep into the image workflow. So it all starts with the sub workflow execution, which gets triggered from the main workflow, because you cannot trigger this workflow, let's say if you click on activate, and it has to get triggered by the main workflow. So once it gets triggered, basically the prompt and the images are provided, sent over as arguments, and then after that we basically set the file AI API key and the IMGBB API. The reason why we use file AI API is because it's a platform where you can not just access Nano Banana, but other visual AI and then models like photo and video one. And the reason why we use IMGBB is because it helps us convert the base64 into an image URL. I explained the reason why we do that. So The next step is basically where we convert the base64 into an image URL, as I've told you. And the reason why we do that is because the File AI endpoint does not accept base64 image codes. It only accepts an image URL. That's why we use IMGB to convert the base64 to an image URL. Once that is done, we make a request to Nano Banana via the File AI API. Told you, and it basically makes the request. And once the request is made, it basically means that the request is in a queue. So we wait for it, which means we wait 5 seconds. After that is done, we check the status of the request that we made. It could be in progress, in queue, or completed. So if it's still in progress, which means the request is in progress, it's being made, but it's not completed, we set up basically a polling system where it waits 30 seconds. Once it's done, we basically have another node that basically gets the output of that request. And it's also the same as if the output of basically this status request, where we check the status of the request, if it's completed, it just moves over straight to get the output of the result instead of going to this polling system. So this polling system is only gone to if the status of this request says in progress. If it doesn't say in progress, it says completed, we move over to get the output of the result. And once that is done, the result of this node is sent automatically to this main workflow, and we basically get the image URL and we send it back to the Lovable UI. The same is also for the Combine workflow. As I've told you, they are similar. The only difference is that the Combine workflow has 2 images, and when the Edit workflow has 1 image. So it's also the same. It gets triggered by the main workflow, and then you set your File AI and IMGBB API key. Once that is done, you can see instead of 1, we have 2 convert images. So it converts the first image from base64 to image URL, and then the second one too from base64 to an image URL. And once that is done, we make an API call, making a request to Nano Banana to basically process the 2 images with our system prompt. Basically, the user prompt, which is kind of the description that you put in the Lovable front end. And once that is done, I told you it's also similar to an edit where you wait 5 seconds. After the 5 seconds, you check the status of the request you made to File AI. And depending on the response, whether that is in progress or completed, if it's in progress, we set up a polling system where we wait 30 seconds. If it's completed, we basically get the output of the request that we have made. Once we get the output, which is an image URL, that result is automatically sent back to the main workflow, and that result is basically sent to Lovable, which is then displayed in the UI here, as you can see. I went down. So that's basically a quick kind of an overview of how everything works. I just want to run a quick edit of this image so that I can show you how the edit function works. So let's remove these images, and let's just click this image that we just made. Let's just tell it to basically change the background. Let's give it a few seconds to process. Once that is done, so going to see the result. Finally, Metallic read. As you can see, I still have my spad. I still have the water bottle. I still the same person holding the water bottle. But the difference between the last image and this image is that it basically followed what I said. It changed the background to the Burj Khalifa. And that's the difference between the edit and the combine. So now, let me show you in depth how everything works from A to Z. So yeah, let's get started. So as I've said, everything starts with this webhook node. Let me go to the executions and so that we can go deep to see how the data flows and all that kind of thing. So yeah, so it all starts with the webhook, which gets triggered by an API call, which is made from the Lovable front end, as I've said. So it sends this JSON, and the body basically has type, prompt, image1 and image2. As I've said, type can be either combined or edit, depending on if 1 picture is uploaded or 2 pictures are uploaded. So, and the type is basically prompt, which is a description that you put in Lovable UI. After that is image 1 and image 2, and both images are converted to base64 before being sent in the API call, basically, and that is basically what we receive here. And the next thing is based on the type. As you can see here, we have a compare operator which looks at the type here. As you can see, JSON.body.type. It checks if it's edit or combine. In this case, it's combine, so it takes us to the route of the sub workflow. And this sub workflow, what gets sent as an argument is basically the prompt, the image 1 and the image 2. And once that is sent, it basically kickstarts the sub workflow, which is the combine image sub workflow. So let's go deep into that too as well. Let's go to executions here and let's get the latest one that we just did. Perfect. So as you can see here, the data that was received is exactly what was passed in the main workflow, which is basically the prompt, image 1 and image 2. And what gets passed on next is basically the API key, which is the FileAI API key and the IMGBB API key. I'll show you later on how to get access to this API key so that you can also run this workflow on your computer. So after that, we make an API request in IMGBB API endpoint, which is a post request, and at the end we pass our API key and a query parameter, and what we pass in as the body is basically a form data, which is the base64, and what we get as a response is basically the image, which is converted from base64 to an image URL, because what IMGBB is an image hosting platform. So if we upload the base64 image, they basically help us host that image on their platform. And what they do in return is that they return an image URL of that image. And what we can use that image URL is that we can use that in other API requests instead of a base64. Much more easier. So we're going to keep this URL handy because we're going to use it in other API calls. So we do the same for the image 2. It's basically the same post request to the same endpoint, but the only difference is that we're using image 2 instead of image 1 here as the value. And once that is done, which means we have 2 image URLs, we make an API request call to the FileAI API. So as you can see here, it's a post request made to the FileAI endpoint with 2 headers, which is the authorization header, which always contains the API key and a content type. And what we send as the body is basically a JSON that contains the prompt and the image URL. Let me quickly expand the prompt so that you can get a feel of what it is and how I basically made it. So let's say now JSON, and as you can see here, basically it says you are a high-skilled artist and photographer with years of experience and multiple internationally recognized awards. You will be provided with 2 images along with a user's instructions for combining the 2 images. And basically your task is to carefully interpret the user's request, merge them accordingly, and ensure the final result not only fulfills the user's vision, but is also visually appealing and professionally refined. So make sure the final image looks natural, polished, and proper, so that you are, and also avoid any odd distortions or natural overlays and unrealistic blending. And this is basically the system prompt, and here we have the user prompt, which is basically the description that we put in the Lovable UI. Basically says what I put in the first combine demo, which says make the person in the picture hold the water bottle and make it a selfie with a mountain background. So this is dynamically added as a variable, as you can see here. It's a variable from the receiving payload from the main workflow. So it gets added here, and then what we have here are the 2 image URLs which we got from the IMGBB image uploads. So we have the image 1 and the image 2. And once we send this over, it basically starts a request. It does not make, it's not similar to the OpenAI API where if you make a request, in the response you're going to get your results. No, what this does is that it starts a queue, As you can see here in the response, it returns the status and the request ID. The request ID, we're going to keep this handy because we're going to use it in future nodes. And this status, it tells us the status of the request. It basically says that the request is in queue, meaning the request has not started, but is going to be started soon, which means it's in queue. So since it's a request, we're going to give it like 5 seconds to kind of process the request, and so that the API can basically process the image for us. And once we wait 5 seconds, we want to check the status of that request, obviously. So we make a get API call to the file AI API endpoint, so using the same headers, which is the authorization, which contains our API key and the content type. But this time, no body, since it's a get request. And the response we get is that we get the status this time. Instead of in queue, it's in progress. It could be completed or in progress. Completed meaning that the request that we made is done and the image is ready. In progress means that the image is still being made, so it's not done. And we still get the same request ID. And also something that I forgot to add is that in the get the get API call, when we get the status of the request that we made, we also have to input our request ID that we got initially from the API endpoint that we made when we initially made that request. So that is why I said it's going to be handy for us. So once we got the request, the next thing is that we have a switch which decides the route of the workflow, basically. So let's say the status here, for example, was completed. As you can see here, it checks the JSON status. Let's say if it's completed, it takes the workflow to another direction. But in this case, it's in progress, which means the image is still not done. What we've done is that we created a polling system, which makes the workflow wait for another 30 seconds. To be honest, the images could be completed in 10 seconds. We just put 5 seconds, but then sometimes it gets done in 5 seconds, but then we just put 30 seconds to give it a breathing room. And once that is done, we take it to the same node as the completed one, so that we can get the output of the request that we've made. So it's similar to the get status of the request API call. As you can see, it's still a get API call using not the same endpoint, but similar endpoint, but you're still providing it with the same request ID, and you're providing it with the authorization header only. What you get as a response is an image URL similar to an IMGBB image URL, which you can copy here. You can copy here, which you can copy here and see the image here. So once that is basically provided to us, this result is automatically sent back to the main workflow. As you can see, there's actually no difference in the output of the API call and the output of the sub workflow of the Combine image. And once that is sent back to us, we send it back to Lovable. As you can see here, we send a JSON which has a URL key, and the value is basically the image URL. And once that image URL is sent, it is displayed in our front end, and then you get an option to download it, basically. So that is how the Combine works. And let me now show you how the edit on sub workflow works. So they are quite similar. Let's go to the execution that we did for the edit. And if you go to the webhook here real quick, you can see this time it's edit, not Combine. So, and the switch case, this time, since it's edit, it took us to the edit path, which takes us to the edit sub workflow. And if we open it right here, we can see that quickly open the execution. We can see right here that what was passed is basically one image instead of two images, if you notice, because this edit is just one image, while combine is two images. You're working at two images instead of one. So edit here, we just passed one image, which is a base64, and the prompt, which is basically what we provided in the Lovable UI, which says change the background to Burj Khalifa. And we basically set the same ape. We basically set ape the file API key at the INGBB API key, which is the same as what we've done in the combine sub workflow. And we this time, instead of converting two images, we convert one image, and it's basically the same as the combine workflow. Same post method, same endpoint, and you send it as a form data. And this time you send image one, and in the response you get this image URL, as I've explained to you how INGBB works. And then once we get that image URL, we pass it over to this request that we make to file AI, which is a post method, and we send it to this endpoint, which is the Nano Banana endpoint, with the authorization and headers of the authorization header and the content type header, and the authorization header always contain the API key, as I've told you, and the JSON. As you can see, it's quite similar to the combine prompt, but it's a bit different. I'll open it for you real quick. A bit different. Okay. So you see, this one says you are a highly skilled artist and photographer with years of experience on multiple internationally recognized awards. So the starter is basically the same, but this is where it gets different. So it says you will be given an image along with a user's instruction for editing it. So, and then it says your task is to basically carefully interpret the user's request, apply the desired changes to the image, and ensure the final result not only reflects the user's vision, but it's also visually appealing and professionally polished. So make sure the final image looks natural, polished, proper, avoiding any distortions, unnatural overlays, or unrealistic blending. So this part is basically the same as the combine. We also have the user prompt, which is dynamically fed as a variable, which is, and this, as you can remember, you basically type this in the Lovable front end. So you can see here, and then we also have the image URLs key with an array, basically where you can upload images. So this time, instead of uploading two images, we're just uploading one, because in the edit mode, we're not combining two images. So just using one image in this case. And once we send that request over, if you can remember, the response we get back is basically similar to this: status and request ID, which are the two things that we're looking out for. We check the status, which says it's in queue, which means the request has started, and the request ID, which will be handy for us, as I've said, in the future nodes for when checking the status of the request and getting the result. And I've also explained how different this is to the OpenAI API call, where in the OpenAI API call you get the results in the same API call. You basically get the results in the response of the API call, but in this case it's different because it takes a bit longer, since it's image processing, not just text. So you basically wait for 5 seconds and then you check the status of the request. It's the same as the combine. There's a get method. We make an API call to the endpoint using the request ID that we've gotten from the response that we've made when we basically made the request, basically. And we send the same header, which is authorization, content type, and nobody. And the response we get is it's in progress, and we get the same request ID. Since it says it's in progress, as you know, this switch functions the same way as it does in the combine. So since it's in progress, it takes us to this polling system, which waits 30 seconds. And if it was to say completed, as you can see here, if it was to say completed, it would take us here. But instead it said in progress, which we had to wait 30 seconds for. We waited 30 seconds, and then we made another API call to the file AI endpoint, which was a GET request using the JSON request ID. Same authorization header. This time, instead of getting the status, we got the output of the request we made, which we got an image URL If you open here, you can see here. Basically change the background, as you can see the difference. So yeah, this output is automatically sent back to the main workflow. As you can see, there's literally no difference. So once that is sent back, we send it back to the Lovable front end using this JSON, which is the URL key and a value, which is the URL, URL here. And then that gets displayed on our front end here, and you have an option to download it. So yeah, that's basically how it works in depth. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to quickly show you how to get this up and running on your own computer. Basically, to get access to this Anytone workflow, what you do is you click the link in the description below, you go to the school community right here. Once you're in, you basically make a request and then I'll accept you. Once you're in, you go to the classroom section, go to the tools, go all the way down, and you're going to find the Nano Banana image generator page. And what you're going to need for this workflow is you're going to need Lovable. You don't need Lovable. All you need is you just need to be able to access this link. Once you access that, you need Anytone, whether that's self-hosted or cloud hosted by Anytone themselves. You do not need Gemini 2.5 Flash. You do not need it directly from Google themselves. All you need is you need to basically create a file AI account basically, and you can just do that by going into file, the AI. And what they're currently doing right now is if you create an account and you put a payment method, they're going to give you $10 in credits, and that $10 in credits goes a long way. So you can basically test things out and see how this workflow works. So yeah, once you have that, you basically create your IMGBB account too as well. You just want to go IMGBB API and create your account, and once you're on this page, you can get access to your API key here. And once you have those ready, what you want to do is you want to download these 3 workflows. As I've told you, it's 3 workflows: the main workflow, the 2 sub workflows, which is one for edit and one for combine. And if you do not want to like watch how to set this up or even the explanation, I have in the Anytone workflows, I have stickers. I have yellow and green stickers. The whole point of the yellow stickers is to basically explain what each node does, and the whole point of the green is basically action steps, where it basically needs you to do something there. For example, put in your API key and stuff. So as you can see here, all the main workflow don't need to do anything there. In the sub workflow here, what you just need to do is to open this node and put in your file AI API key here and your IMGBB API key here. And that's the same for the combine tool as well. You open the edit API key node here, and then you just put your file AI API key and your IMGBB API key. And once that is done, you do not need to activate it, because you cannot even activate it in the first place, because it can only get triggered by the main workflow. That's for the both sub workflows. So once that is done, all you have to do is just to click on activate, copy your webhook production URL, and just open the Lovable front end, paste in your webhook URL here, paste in your prompt, and put your images, and you can get started. That's how you get started. So yeah, and that is that for today's video, and I hope you liked it. And yeah, see you in the next one.